Hey, what's up? Hello, everyone. Welcome into Fantasy Filmball, the show where we turn movies into sports and sports into something we don't talk about here. My name is Matt.
And my name is Dyl. Welcome to our 2025 Best Picture Revisiting Series.
Here are the 10 nominees for Best Motion Picture of the Year.
Anora.
The Brutalist.
A Complete Unknown.
Conclave.
Dune, Part 2.
Amelia Perez.
I'm Still Here.
Nickel Boys.
The Substance.
And Wicked.
And on today's episode, we'll be discussing Dune Part 2, which racked up 5 Academy Award nominations. And we're joined by a very special guest and friend of the channel, JonathanFujii.
Welcome into episode 2 of the Best Picture Revisiting series, and today we are talking about Dune Part 2. We got our popcorn buckets. We are ready to go. One of my absolute favorite movies of the year. The film that I wanted to see when I saw the first Dune movie. This one really delivered everything I wanted to. So I want to know, what do you guys think about this one? Because, I mean, Dylan, I see your shirt there.
Yeah, Dune Part 2 is my second favorite movie of the year. I also have my popcorn bucket here. It's my beloved. It sits right next to my bed every night. But in terms of the Oscars, in terms of the nominations, for some reason, the Academy has this giant sequel bias when it comes to rewarding films in a series that they've already showered with love. The first chapter of Denis Villeneuve's Dune saga racked out double-digit nominations, and it won 6 categories, which to me was awesome. But the crazy thing is, unlike Avatar: The Way of Water or the Lord of the Rings films, this film of Part 2 is widely regarded as the better in the film series, more akin to something like The Godfather Part 2, which did fine with awards. But here with Dune Part 2, the drop-off from 10 nominations to 5, from 6 wins probably down to 3 or less. So it's just so crazy because Dune Part 2, for me, is a technical marvel. It's one of my favorite films of the entire decade. It's gripping, it's thrilling, it's suspenseful, and I think it has a lot of real-world parallels as well. It has so many ties to the scares of following your faith and following people who may be false prophets, and the way that the screenplay works, the direction, all of this thing. It's a cinematic triumph to me, and I'm disappointed that it only received 5 nominations, but I'm happy to talk about those today, and then we can talk about the nominations that we wish the film received. But John, are you with us with this Dune Part 2 love?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I hate to be boring because I don't know if this is actually true or if I'm just projecting, but I feel like a lot of people this year are like, oh, like, of course, like, film bros love Dune Part 2. But I reject that premise because I think this does so much more. And I don't know if people are familiar with like the Rewatchables like podcast, but they were talking about not necessarily of like perfect movies, but in terms of the goal a movie is trying to accomplish, is it a perfect movie? And I think Dune Part 2, with what it is trying to accomplish, is a perfect movie in that regard. I think it not only builds on what Part 1 did, it is completely satisfying, it is action-packed, it's accessible for people. And I actually kind of talked about this on a video I made, but there's a lot of talk with the Best Picture winners, especially this year, with how things are shaping up. I think all problems would be solved if this won Best Picture. Obviously, it has like a fat 0% chance of that ever happening. But I think this would do it. Not in a way of Oppenheimer, but a way that a movie that is big, people saw, people generally like, but also has the merits of what a Best Picture winner typically is, has artistic vision. I think this is like a full package, and I am not someone who needs to wait to know when when I'm seeing something like on screen. I don't need to wait 10 years for that. Like I felt it when I first saw it and subsequent viewings after. And I just think it's a mistake. I think it's a mistake to wait for Dune Messiah, if that is even what the Academy is doing. I just think this whole thing has been really, really muddled in terms of the Oscar race. As a movie, I cannot complain at all.
I like what you said there, that, you know, being someone that can see a classic and identify a classic right when you see it. And I agree. You know, I knew that this was going to be an enormous triumph from the second that you see those Harkonnens floating up onto the top of that rock. That was the moment for me where I was like, this is doing something on a whole other level. Watching it today on my TV, all I could think was, I wish I was back in that IMAX theater, hearing that IMAX sound and just seeing some of the most breathtakingly composed and massive images that I've ever seen in film. So I completely agree with you. We should be talking about it as a potential Best Picture winner. And it's speaking about something greater. Dylan, you were talking about religious dogma and the way that leaders can trick people into following them because of religious fervor when they're really just doing it to suit their own desires, their own selfish ends. So there's so much that this movie's doing. Honestly, I think we could have been talking about it in winning contention if it had released right now. Not right now, but, if it had released in December instead of releasing all the way back in March. Because the momentum died out a little bit. It was the movie of the moment at that time, and then you leave all that time for movies to come in and take its place. And at this point, Wicked has sort of taken the throne of like the blockbuster that everyone's talking about, the blockbuster that people are going out to the multiplex to see, that's pleasing the crowds. And if Dune had released around now, I'm curious what the difference in the conversation would be.
I fully agree. And there was all this conversation upon Dune's release and throughout the early parts of award season. Had part 2 came out last year before the strikes had affected its release, how would it have done? And personally, I think the performance would have been somewhere around the same just because of how stacked last year was. But there's been so much talk about this year's Best Picture lineup and how we're missing that top dog. There's no Oppenheimer, there's no Poor Things, there's no Everything All at Once. This year, there's just a lot of films vying for that number 1, number 2 spot, and Dune Part 2, had it came out in that Wicked slot or the Avatar The Way of Water slot right around Christmas, it could have been a major player, like you're saying, not just in these below-the-line categories like Part 1, but maybe we could have seen a world where Denis actually gets the Best Director nomination, or crazy enough as what some people were hyperbolizing earlier in the year, maybe a chance for someone like Javier Bardem or someone like that in the acting categories to show up. And it's just a shame to see the Oscars reactions, I guess, to sequels is how they always have to be continuing returns unless they're sweeping. And I think it's something that we'll see with Wicked for Good next year, is there's all this talk this year, if Arrivo misses, she could potentially win next year. But the fact that she maybe couldn't have gotten it this year, and the fact that she did, but she probably won't win, probably means next year she's not in our top 5 whatsoever.
I agree with you that, we don't have that much of a precedent for it, and maybe that's not the whole case, but I can't help but still feel like that. Like they are just kind of waiting still, which I just think is a mistake. And I'll say that for Wicked, if people believe that this Wicked Part 1 is the best movie of the year, like they should just vote for it. Like they should just vote for it for Best Picture. Like forget the Wicked for Good is coming later. Like there's no guarantee of anything. And Dune Messiah, I believe, has a December release date in 26. There is a feeling of finality with that, so maybe it does. But I mean, at the end of the day, even though people will throw a bunch of different examples, all of which are true, still, it is an uphill battle if your movie is released before October with the Academy. I just think that is a fact. You have to be a really special case to break that, like Everything Everywhere or Get Out. You have to. And yeah, especially this year, even though, and again, I realize I'm saying this as the person who doesn't like Wicked, but even though there is Wicked, it still feels like there's like an even larger blockbuster epic scale hole that's missing from this year. And I don't know, I just feel like it could have solved a lot of problems still. It's just a bummer, honestly.
And I will also just jump in because those examples, Everything Ever All at Once being an April release, Get Out being a February release, something really important with those is I don't think of them that way at all because the people in the Academy, they weren't watching it when it first released. It's new to them when awards season hits. So when you have something like Dune that everyone in the Academy would have seen back in March, that's going to mean that people are forgetting it. Whereas something like Get Out, something like Everything Everywhere benefits from the fact that people weren't considering it an awards contender until awards season arrived. And then it was presented to those voters on a platter saying, this came out earlier in the year, but it's still new to you. So to the point, though, it's rare to get something like Oppenheimer where everyone sees it when it comes out and it stays in the conversation because no voters were watching that for the first time when awards season hit. Whereas something like Coda, something like Everything Everywhere, benefited from being fresh and new to those Academy members.
Well, you talk about being fresh and new, and that could be part of the reason why the sequelitis bug really hit Dune Part 2 and the nomination total dropped a little bit down. So why don't we dive into the rest of its 5 nominations, kicking things off with Best Cinematography, because this is one that a lot of people were predicting all year long. Hey, this one is going to be the one to miss out. They never do sequels. The visual language is, for detractors, kind of the same, but for people who love it, like myself, is so different, because what Greg Fraser is doing in here, to me, is so stunning. With each viewing, I've now seen this movie 5 times. I find new elements to love in its visual style, and while I was a fan of the first film's cinematography, I really feel like what Fraser and Villeneuve are doing here with the visual approach really elevates Dune Part 2, and I think it's something John said earlier. A lot of the technical elements are elevating upon what we understood and what we saw inside the first film. And I love the vibrant orange aesthetics that Fraser gives the Fremen Desert. And then on the flip side, everything that's on Getty Prime, that introduction sequence with Fade Rotha, it's so pulse-pounding, largely due to the innovative decision to shoot this film in infrared. I recently went to a Q&A with Denis Villeneuve where he talked at extent about how intelligent and how smart Greg Fraser is, and how he brings so many brilliant ideas to all the projects that he works on. And personally, for me, it's sad to hear that he won't be attached to Messiah because of his commitment to the Batman Part 2. So with all that being said, Linus Sandgren has some big shoes to fill in Messiah. He's done great work in the past, but Greg Fraser is a once-in-a-generation type talent.
Dude, the Black Sun of Getty Prime is one of the greatest inventions in adaptation that I've ever seen. That's not in the book. There's nothing about that anywhere. And to just create that idea that makes this planet feel so alien, which is all to do with the lighting. It all just changes how it looks. My God, what a brilliant idea. Like, that is genius. And I do think this elevates every aspect of what the original did in its photography. This is just doing it all, but elevated. You know, the colors are more striking. The first one I thought was really visually interesting, but a lot of it was those beige gray tones. And in this one, instead of letting the sand be beige gray, it turns it into like that deep saturated orange. And God, this is a stunning movie. And if I could change one Oscar decision that I think, like, I don't think we're going to get this as a winner. I really don't. But I would love to see this win and break that sequel curse of cinematography.
I mean, personally, the fact that it got the nomination, I think, keeps it in the winning conversation. But we haven't had any major cinematography precursors. So ASC, BSC, BAFTA, save us. Give us a Dune Part 2 sweep.
Yeah. Please, dear God, save us. This should win. And as someone who loves the first Dune, to be honest, I don't even know if I would have given it cinematography, like the first,
I wouldn't
the
have.
first Dune. I don't think I would have, even though it is like a gorgeous movie to look at. But
Mhm.
this one is completely leveled up in ways that is kind of hard to believe, especially seeing it like on the IMAX screen. I mean, with blockbusters, I mean, I remember seeing this with my friends and they came out and they're like, how come Marvel movies don't look like that? And they're just like, they're like the most like normie moviegoers ever. But it's true. I feel like a lot of the audience now is kind of used to a certain look from blockbusters that are hundreds of millions of dollars. And this one just looks the way I mean, it's gorgeous. It's beautiful. I think this absolutely should win. And it is
Mhm.
kind of like undeniable to me, personally speaking, but it is just, it's on another level to me.
Yeah.
It's not even close.
It's just stunning. There's so many shots that rewatching it today, I had to pause and go, who the hell thinks of this? The shot of all of the Fremen in the south that the crowd just parts as Paul walks through. That is one of the most stunning compositions that I've seen in a long, long time. And every scene feels like there's a moment that is just lit or composed in a way that is just, who thinks of this? Who dreams that visual idea up? Like, Denis Villeneuve is a fascinating visual storyteller because he really does like to lean away from dialogue and just let the lighting tell the story, let the blocking tell the story. And here it's just the camera's in the right place every single time and it's lit just right. But Dylan, to your point, saying that it's in the win contention, I would say, I guess so. But to me, the thing that really fucks with sequels is you think about voters getting a ballot and they just gave Dune all these wins. You have to think they're going to sit down and look at that and go, well, I just voted for that a couple of years ago. Is it really all that different from the first one? And I'm sitting here going, yeah, hell yeah, it is. Hell yeah, it's different. It's doing stuff that we absolutely did not see in the first one. But, we have a rule with the score branch that a sequel has to have 80% new material in order to qualify, and Dune was disqualified. And I wonder if we were to do that same rule or a variation of that rule for all of the different categories that Dune was eligible in, how many categories would it be eligible in?
Well, that's one thing that Denis really talked about in that Q&A that I attended. He explained how him and his team didn't want to repeat the visual style of the first film, and they, in his words, push boundaries, adding new dynamics to the look of Dune Part 2. And I mean, we've heard the stories of the meticulous planning that went into each shot, of how they location scout using the sun to make sure they had the exact moment that they wanted with the sun in the exact spot. And there's so many instances, like you said, Matt, you can just pause this movie and just be in awe of the visual style that's both in the cinematography, but in tandem with a lot of these technical elements as well. And that leads us to our next nomination, being production design. And this one is one that I understand why people are like, oh, this one didn't really need to come along. But I feel like what it's doing to the world of Arrakis makes it feel very lived in, and it feels very immersive, because like these new set pieces are working with the established ones in part one, because like the Fremen Sieges, that's something we really didn't get to see the first time around. But these feel so vast and grand, and you can tell like when you're walking with Stilgar through them, there's been decades, if not thousands of years of souls whose bodies have been placed inside the water that you can tell people have walked, breathed, and lived inside. And then you go over to Giedi Prime with the Harkonnen, and like, I mean, this could be a one-to-one analogy, but like the arena looks straight out of something like a Gladiator or Ancient Rome, and then you go to the rest of the shots and they feel fresh out of like World War II tyranny movies, of looking at the Nazis or Italy or Japan and how they had a lot of their structures put together. And there's so many amazing production design set pieces in here, but it's not just the buildings that we see. It's the spaceships, it's the devices they use to get the water out of the people. It's all these little elements that come together to make Arrakis, Giedi Prime, and the entire world Dune feel like a real place you could theoretically go to. And I feel like personally that's one of the issues with a lot of space-centric movies, is how they feel alien, to use your word from earlier, Matt, but like alien in a way that's not real, while Dune feels completely inhabited.
I thought I was going to think of, we talk a lot about, how different does this feel from the first Dune? And, before kind of getting into this conversation, I could see that. But now that I'm thinking about it, I guess I just like disagree with that, like totally.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about the cinematography. I mean, there's black and white in there, for God's sake. But with the production design too, it feels much different to me than the first one. It is so much more grand and expansive. And I do love the world building of the first Dune. That was one of my favorite aspects of it. And then again, it just completely levels up and evolves. I mean, there are so many different set pieces that it feels like would be like catnip for all other production designers. I mean, it hits so much. I mean, you mentioned like a goddamn Coliseum basically, and also the space elements. Sci-fi and fantasy is an area where production design it is rather favorable for. We've seen that before with stuff like Black Panther. So I don't know. I'm quite frankly, I was surprised that this got into. I think I was just like doom scrolling in my head about Dune is going to get like 2-3 nominations. So I'm happy, but again, no one's going to predict this to win anyways.
Yeah, the production design in this is definitely very strong. Because I think of even stuff like the Spice Crawlers, where, yes, we saw it in the first movie, but we didn't see it from that angle. We didn't see those little, almost bug-like talons going into the sand and digging up the spice. We didn't see that angle. And so, yes, we are seeing all of the same things that we saw in the first movie, but we're seeing them in new ways. They're building on those ideas, making them grander, and just developing them a little bit more. I also think of like the Emperor's ship just being this giant mirror that floats over the desert. And that's just like that. What a stunning image there. And I know we're going to talk snubs later, but I just want to bring up one here because I thought production design and costume design went together in this way. That, yes, it's all the same stuff, but with new, improved ideas, things that are being added to it. You know, I paused at one moment to look at Florence Pugh's headpiece, the one that's covered in the jewels. And I just thought to myself, how did they leave this out? That's insane, because it's not just the Fremen outfits. It's everything with the Emperor. Everything with the Bene Gesserit is new in this film. And, you know, going back to what I was saying before, how many of these categories, if you were to do that score comparison and, you know, if you had to pass an 80% threshold of new things, I think Dune Part 2's costume design would pass that 80% new for the sequel.
Yeah, and it's like early on in the year, costumes, makeup, those were things we were strongly considering and maybe even win contention. And now at the end of the day, because the movie came out so long ago, and maybe that's just the mind of the Oscar voter, we only think about what recently came out, what the last few movies we saw, those ones were on the cutting room floor. But these next two categories we're talking about were the ones that were almost gimmies for Dune. Locke wins, potentially, maybe things can go astray. But sound is one I was never worried about. I mean, like I said before, I've seen this film in everywhere possible. Dolby, IMAX, the DGA theater, HBO Max at home, and the sound is always so phenomenal. The crispness of the dialogue to the uses of mixing the score, from the clashing of the knives, the firing of the guns, and there's the sandworms erupting even at home. That's such great sound work, and it all combines to use a good old Dune popcorn bucket word, eargasmic experience. And it's the best sound work of the year, and I hope, if anything, for Dune Part 2, just like Avatar The Way of Water, this is the one category it can at least win.
Yeah, the sound, it brings the boom, as they say. It's like, it's phenomenal. And the thing that you said that stood out to me there is, how can a movie be so loud all the time and yet be so clear with the dialogue? Like, Christopher Nolan should be fucking taking notes here. Like, yes, you can blast the music at 11 the entire time. You can fill your movie with explosions and the sound of a worm going through the sand and that rumble. And yet you can still hear every goddamn word. There's not a moment that isn't clear and crisp in this. It is so impressive, and it never sounds like they're boosting the levels in an unnatural way. There's moments where they're struggling to be heard to each other, but we still hear them clearly, and it feels natural. It feels right. This is godly sound.
Yeah, the sound mixing is the best of the year. And I like to, again, to go back to my normie friends, because I like to use my normie friends as an example. Mm-hmm. But sound is one of the most like obvious things in this movie that you walk away from. It is the most clear as day, impressive, especially when you're seeing it in whatever format. It truly doesn't matter. And especially when you're thinking about Oscar voters and you're sending clips in, or if there's a bake off or whichever, there's not. I mean, it's just like, what part do you choose? Do you take Timmy riding the worm? You can do that and you'll get a nomination guaranteed. You can take the whole end battle fight and you're good. You can take the Black Sun Gady Prime with Austin Butler going crazy. Like, you can pinpoint so many different scenes that have all the different sound work in it, and there's like not a single flaw there. So this should be a layup. Again, I'm still nervous for like anything this year. I clearly don't know anything that's going on anymore with this awards race, but thinking about it, even though this doesn't have to do with sound, I would like flip the first Dune in this. Like, first Dune, give it 5 noms and it'll win like visual effects. And then give this one like 10.
Yeah. And honestly, there was a possibility of that if it didn't release in such a light year for blockbusters. We could have seen a year where they looked at that and went, maybe for the next one, but, we have to give other stuff this time. But yeah, with the sound, if I were to pinpoint, like you were saying, that 10-minute sequence that you would show off and say, this is the sound, to me, it's the whole sequence when Rabin brings all of the planes to attack the siege, and they explode it and they land and they're in the fog, and it's just silence, and every once in a while you hear the sound of a knife entering into someone's still suit. That's the sequence for me, that the sound design is everything. That's just phenomenal work.
Muad'Dib! Show yourself!
And we talk about sound being the most obvious thing in terms of a nomination, but on the flip side of that, at least for me, is visual effects, where obviously looking at this movie, you know there's visual effects, but I think the strongest element of it is that the fact that these effects are flawless, and you can't really tell which ones are visual and which ones are practical. And to me, that's the best sign of CGI, is when you cannot see where the blend's at. It all feels like it could be real. Going back to the production design, costumes that we talked about earlier, it just adds to this entire immersive feeling that really makes Dune Part 2 stand out head and shoulders above the rest of the films inside this genre.
I don't even know how much it's worth talking about the visual effects here, because like it's just so obvious. You've seen the trailer, you know that this is the best visual effects of the year. You know that this is like godly stuff.
Yeah, I don't have to speak long about it. I mean, the worms are real, as far as I'm concerned. Like, they're real, like clearly on screen. There's not an ounce of fakeness to what I'm seeing on screen. And the fact that like the Dune movies are not like the most expensive budgeted movies of the year, like they never are. It's just like, what other excuse do other blockbusters have?
Yeah, what's missing from these other movies? Why can they do this? And you know, Marvel has fucking whatever the hell MODOK was in Ant-Man Quantumania. Like, how can they get away with that? And I know the way that they get away with that is that people will pay for the ticket regardless of how it actually looks. Whereas with Dune, you know, if you see a trailer and it doesn't look fucking flawless, people aren't going to buy a ticket. Whereas Marvel gets a lot of grace.
Well, Johnny, you didn't talk much about VFX, but now we're into snubs, and I know that there's a lot of snubs that weren't the best for all of us, so kick us off. Which ones do you want to talk about first?
Well, we don't have to bury the lead here. We can... Denis Villeneuve, like, right? I mean, he should be James Mangold, bro. Come on now. Come on. I don't even hate A Complete Unknown either. I want to make very clear, I don't hate that movie. I thought it was pretty solid, but as a top 5 directorial achievement of the year, absolutely not. There is no sequelitis or what. This cannot happen again. This cannot happen again. The Academy does not have my good graces that much, right? So I think Denis Villeneuve not getting into director, even though it wasn't surprising for either of us, for any of us, we all knew this was coming, but still, what the hell?
Something that we were saying in our Complete Unknown episode, I was kind of going against Mangold's director nomination, because that's a movie that feels like, even though it's strong, solid direction, there's nothing wrong with it, you would never watch that and go, this is a James Mangold movie. It could have been anyone. Whereas you watch Dune Part 2, any Villeneuve movie, and you immediately know that is the mark of that particular filmmaker. That is what they did. That is what they influenced. And of course, all of these tech departments that we're speaking about, the production design, the cinematography, the sound, all of that comes back to those elements are that way in every Villeneuve movie. He has such a command over the form. He has such a distinct voice, such a distinct visual presence. That is, like, it is auteur filmmaking on the biggest scale possible, because immediately you know who made this. And I think that's the type of direction we should be rewarding.
Yeah, and I mean, like John said, after that Globe snub, there's a lineup of 6. He couldn't make his way in there. We were preparing for the inevitable. But the one that really burns me a little bit more is the screenplay missing out, because this half of the Dune novel is the more unadaptable half because of how many bizarre aspects are inside the novel. And they made so many creative switches that were very well received by the audience at whole, and people who didn't even know Dune couldn't even tell, like, oh, that's something they completely switched up on the negative side of things. And the fact that he got nominated for part one, which was more about laying the groundwork of this world, but he missed out for part two, where that's the execution of everything the first half build upon, and at least for all three of us and for audiences at large, walked away on such a high and a thrill of everything that we just watched unfold over the course of two films.
You know what really peeves me? The editing miss. What the holy hell was that? Because by all means, I mean, we knew the director's snub was coming. We knew since 2021 that snub was coming because they did it for the first one. And if the first one performed so much better, as I think everyone clocked that this was not going to reach the same highs in terms of Oscar love, if that one couldn't even get a director nomination, this never was going to. And then when this started getting those snubs from like the BAFTA, when it got snubbed from the USC scripter, like we knew that that screenwriting snub was coming. Who the fuck decided that this was not going to be nominated for editing? It is a 2-hour, 40-minute movie that flies by in an instant. It is perfectly paced. You know, you can pause the movie at any moment and be absolutely shocked at how much has happened in small amounts of time. It is just breathtaking how they paced this out, how it cuts together. God, and especially because we always think of the Academy lumping together sound and editing. And when the sound is that strong, I'm just amazed that they didn't bring the editing along with it.
Yeah, I think with the Awards Expert app and Gold Derby pre-nominations, everyone, like most people, were predicting Dune Part 2 to win editing.
Yeah.
Because of that correlation with sound. And you mentioned the pacing, which is completely right. I mean, it's the fastest 2-hour, 40-minute movie I've like ever seen in my life. And also with how many storylines and narratives and still weird stuff that is in the Dune movies, it is so easy to follow. I mean, I brought my wife's youngest sister who hadn't even seen the first Dune. I just like rambled for like a few minutes on like what she missed in the first Dune, and she watched it and she gave it 5 stars. She was like, wow, that was the best thing I've like ever seen.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to follow narratively. The pacing never drags. There's never a moment. Like I don't know. The editing thing was so shocking, especially for what got in over Dune, which I don't have to specify, but we all know, if you watch my channel, you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, it's just disheartening.
And I mean, obviously we knew for a very long time score wasn't going to happen because it was disqualified, which, you know, Dylan, you and I called that very early on, that this was going to happen because similar things have happened in the past. But listening to the score again, the new stuff is the best stuff. You know, I think of the scene where Chani and Paul are sitting on top of the sand dunes and they're talking about how on Caladan, it's all water instead, it's waves. And that love theme just, oh my God, that's the score moment of the year, alongside that, like hearing that first trumpet in The Brutalist. Those are the two music moments in movies that I just like felt like I was levitating out of my goddamn seat listening to. And so it is disheartening that they disqualified this score when something like Wicked gets in, which, you know, no knock against the Wicked music, because I think it's very strong music. It's just not original music, you know. And why is this being disqualified because it was a movie, when Wicked can basically just use all of the themes that Stephen Schwartz wrote 20 years ago for the original Broadway show and go, yeah, that's an original score. There we go. Boom.
Yeah, I echo a lot of what you just said there, Matt. After watching the movie earlier today, I had to run some errands, got some groceries, put the Dune score in my headset, and like you said, every track, especially all the new ones, are the best ones here. It's the opening one. The beginnings are such a delicate time to the love theme, as you mentioned, and especially the songs that play near the end of the film as the final troops are heading off to the ships and during the credits. And then not even to mention the Harkonnen Arenas track. That adds an addition to the cinematography and everything that's happening inside that sequence. The score here is phenomenal, and it sucks that, one, it wasn't eligible, and two, the places that it is eligible, it's not winning because of the same mindset. Oh, you won last time, Hans Zimmer. You don't really need to win again this time.
Yeah, which is weird because I I don't see now I'm starting to sound like here for the first one, but like the first Dune score, like the fact that it was such a strong like sweeper, I don't even know if like I agree with that necessarily because I agree with both of you. The new stuff in here is my favorite part of that score, and it's what I think is worthy of the nomination. And the fact that everyone keeps explaining to me like the rules of the eligibility with Wicked and the Star Wars and the Indiana Jones, and I read it over and over, and I still don't understand like why. It's again sucks.
I like Dune Part 1 score as a whole more than Dune Part 2 score, but I think both of them are among the year's best for both years. So the fact that, like we're talking about here, it's ineligible for such petty little rules really hurts, and especially when you talk about just the reception of Dune Part 2 overall, because my last major stub I really want to talk about, and this one was very unrealistic, but was the acting for the film, specifically at SAG. The first film basically missed out everywhere for ensemble prizes, and that cast from top to bottom was very outstanding. And now this time around, you have a lot of the same cast coming back, but really expanding upon their roles. But also some of the new additions to the cast, like Austin Butler, Florence Pugh, are really stealing the scenes at their end. So I know we don't have a casting category so far. One's coming next year, but assuming the category was here this year, Dune Part 2 probably would not have been there anyway.
I would have loved to see Javier Bardem get some love. He's hilarious, but it becomes deeply menacing because you just see how broken and fucked up this guy is. And that, yeah, we can laugh at him at first, but some of the craziest people seem funny on the outside, but they will murder you. They will murder you. And so Stilgar becomes so terrifying because he's such a fanatic. But really, like, God, I just can't believe, John, I'm with you. I love the first movie, but thinking back to some of the love that got in that season, some of the places that was honored where I think it stepped it up this time and didn't get that same love, the amount of critics groups that went for Rebecca Ferguson on the first movie and not this one is mystifying. I don't understand that whatsoever. She has more to do in this one. She is giving so much more. She's playing multiple personalities through this. Like, this is Rebecca Ferguson gives a phenomenal performance, and not one place the entire year, not one critic group acknowledged her, and that's crazy to me.
Yeah, it feels backwards. I completely echo what you're saying. Rebecca Ferguson has more to do. I love Javier Bardem in this, and I have a great relationship with the Chalamet stans. But like I think he's better in this one than like a complete unknown. I prefer this performance over what I see in a complete unknown. I just think I saw what he was doing in the first one, and that's someone who really likes him as an actor. I was like, okay, like he's servicing the role very well in the first one. I think he suits it. And then this one, I really had to be convinced when that turn was going to come, and he convinced me. I think it is one of my favorite performances of the year, especially in that lead actor category. Obviously, they were never going to go for it. You know, sci-fi acting nominations, it's hard to come by for whatever reason. So, yeah, I totally agree with all of you.
I mean, this is a perfect example of where an actor could be nominated for twice in the same category. Like, do it Timothée Chalamet for Dune and A Complete Unknown, and then Sebastian Stan for A Different Man and The Apprentice. Would be cool to see. It's never going to happen, but now we're at the super cool point of the episode where we hear our guest, John, your personal preferential ballot. I think we can all kind of assume what your number 10 is going to be, so you can talk as little or as much as you want about all 10 of these films.
This will be a video on my channel, but I'll give you all the scoop first. So Emilio Perez is at -17, down all the way down there. That is last. Then I would go Wicked. Let's just get the stand out the way there. I would go Wicked.
Mm-hmm.
I would go, we take a slight jump up. I'll do A Complete Unknown, which I think is a solid movie. I do not dislike that movie. 8 nominations. A little bit of glazing, though, on that one. I can't lie. And then after that, another jump, I guess. Feels bad to say. I guess I would go Nickel Boys. I'm probably the most impressed by Nickel Boys, but again, like how I really come away with movies, like rewatchability or whichever. It hasn't stuck with me the way that something like The Zone of Interest has. I guess I'll put it that way. So I would do that one. Then I would go The Substance. So I'm liking all these movies already. I like The Substance. Then I guess I would go I'm Still Here.
Hmm.
And then I would do Conclave, which is insane. Never thought I'd say that. And then I would go The Brutalist, Honora Dune. But Honora Dune is tough, but I think I would do that.
We've had 2 ballots so far. Dune Part 2 is atop of both of these ballots. Next episode, though, you mentioned Emilia Perez at number 10. We will be diving into Emilia Perez here on the 2025 Best Picture Revisiting Series. But before we get out of here, John, I mean, everyone here already knows where to find you.
Yeah, it's just my name, JonathanFujii, at Twitter, YouTube, Letterboxd, Instagram, I think. So yeah, yellow icon, easy to find.
That's a wrap on episode 2 of our 2025 Best Picture Revisiting Series. Here's the current combined leaderboard for both our guest and Matt and I's preferential ballot. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next episode where Swerve Master 18 and Antonio will be joining us to discuss Emilia Perez.